Okay. So what I want to talk about tonight is fellowship. I had a recent opportunity. If you're not familiar with it, Sean Finnegan does a podcast called Restitutio, the Restitutio podcast. It's a really good podcast. He did. I got introduced to it a few months back when he interviewed Jerry Werewolf on the subject of exegetical fallacies. And I read a book by D.A. Carson many years ago on that subject, and it was really, really good. I learned a ton from that book. And so it was really cool listening to Jerry be interviewed on that subject. And so I started, and when I had a chance to meet Sean last fall, we got to talk about a lot of different things and had a lot in common. That was pretty cool. And so I started listening to his podcast, and it's really good. So he interviewed me about virtual fellowship and, talking about how in the biblical Unitarian community, there's quite a few people that are isolated, don't have local fellowships. So your options are you don't have a fellowship, you don't have anything like that, or you go to typically to a Trinitarian church. And, in most of those kind of cases, you're going to have to be pretty guarded about, what you believe. And there's always this element of not really being able to get really close to people because, you can, but at some point, if, it comes out that you're a biblical Unitarian, there's a good chance you're going to lose those relationships. You're going to get kicked out of the church, that kind of stuff. Now, that's not 100% true. There are plenty of churches out there that won't do that. But there, maybe plenty is the wrong term, but there's definitely churches out there that won't do that. But you also get into a situation where the more accepting the church is of your biblical Unitarianism, probably the more accepting the church is of a lot of other things too. And in some cases, the other things may be unacceptable to you. And so there's this problem, right? So we've been doing this virtual fellowship for a while, and most of you guys know what that's like. And so he and I had been talking about that, and he wanted to interview me about that. So he did it, and I think it went really well. And so I definitely recommend listening to his podcast, and not just that one, but his podcast in general. And so I thought it'd be good to talk about fellowship tonight. So if you turn to Acts chapter 2.
Come here, Jeremiah.
And Acts chapter 2. We're going to go towards the end of the chapter. We're going to pick it up in verse 41. Acts chapter 2, verse 41 says, "So those who accepted his message were baptized, and that day about 3,000 people were added to them, and they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching," there's one, "to the fellowship," which really isn't fellowship, I'll talk about that in a minute, "to the breaking of bread," that's fellowship, "and to the prayers." Right, so they're basically, I like to call these the 4 foundational activities of Christianity. That they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, so they were learning. They were growing and maturing in God's truth. Number 2, to the fellowship, this is actually koinonia, and it means full sharing, and it has to do with giving, right? That they were giving to each other. They were taking care of each other in the sense of, and we're going to look at this here in a second. They were helping each other out all the time, and giving money, things, just whatever they, it's going to say here in a second. They had all things in common. That's the fellowship. The breaking of bread, that's what we would call fellowship. Right? They got together and ate together. It's symbolic of their spending time together to say that they broke bread together. And then finally, into the prayer. So they prayed, right? That was the regular activity that they had. It says, verse 43, then fear came over everyone, and many wonders and signs were being performed through the apostles. Now all the believers were together. That's their fellowship. And had all things in common. They sold their possessions and property and distributed the proceeds to all as anyone had need. There's your koinonia. There's their full sharing. They shared everything. Every day they devoted themselves to meeting together in the temple complex and broke bread from house to house. So they were meeting every day together, eating together, meeting together. They ate their food with joyful and humble attitude, praising God and having favor with all the people. And every day the Lord added to them those who were being saved. So what we see about fellowship here in these sort of foundational things, this is the beginning of the Christian church. And from the very beginning, these are the four things that they did to, as Christians, and in a foundational way. Obviously, there's more than that. We learn to speak in tongues and that kind of stuff. But from a foundational standpoint, the four activities that they did: apostles' doctrine, giving, and taking care of one another, fellowshipping together, and praying. And you see, fellowship is not a once-a-week meeting together. You see that? Fellowship is being involved with each other's lives. Fellowship is being friends and brothers and sisters. It's being a family. It's being connected to each other in a much more intimate way than a weekly church service, especially, right? That's a weekly church service is not fellowship. That's not one of those four foundational things. Now, maybe at that weekly fellowship, you might get some apostles' doctrine, right? And you might have an opportunity to give, at that weekly meeting, and that's okay. It's good, but it's not fellowship. Fellowship is really being involved in each other's lives. So take a look at, skip over. Well, actually, before we do this, I want to go to John chapter 13. John chapter 13, and we're going to go down to verse 35. Actually, verse 34. Jesus says, I give you a new command: love one another. Just as I have loved you, you must also love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. So not only are we commanded to love one another, it is the foundational command from Jesus Christ to the church. So all believers are commanded to love one another. And Jesus, when we appear in front of him for judgment, Jesus is going to hold us accountable to this commandment. And so, it's interesting in verse 35, by this all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. Now, one of the problems that we have in the modern Western church is, in general, we don't have this. You don't see this. You can't go around to people in our culture and say, how do you tell if someone's a Christian? And the person in the culture goes, oh, well, those are the people that really love each other. Right? That's not what they're going to say. In fact, some of them might say, oh, those are the people that are hypocrites, And some of them are going to say, well, I guess if they go to church on Sunday or something like that, right? Or they've got a fish symbol on the back of their car. They might, who knows? Or some people might say, I have no idea. I don't know how to tell them apart from anybody else. And what they're not going to say, though, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I don't think so. I don't think they're going to say, oh, well, those are easy because they love each other so much. And yet, this is what Jesus says, that the hallmark of Christianity is supposed to be that Christians love each other so much that the rest of the culture can mark them out by that fact. So this is why fellowship is really important, because it's hard to love each other if you're not in fellowship, right? Yeah, you can't love someone. This is what, when I talk about having, a relationship with Jesus and with God to people, especially to Christians, I like to point out that the analogy in the church for, I'm going to move this real quick because my computer fan has decided to kick up. The analogy for the church with Christ is a bride and a groom, right? And the analogy for our relationship with God is a father and his children. And so if you think about those two relationships, you think about a bride and a groom, a husband and a wife, right? And you want to say, okay, does a husband and wife have a relationship? Do they have fellowship if they never talk to each other? How about a father and his children? Would you say that the children and the father have a great relationship with each other if the children have never actually met their father and all they have is a biography somebody else wrote about him? No. So, in those situations, that's why I like to say, you don't really have authentic Christianity without the Spirit of God in action. If you are not actively talking to God and God is talking to you, and the same with Jesus Christ, you don't actually have authentic Christianity. It's not to say that you're not a Christian. I'm not saying that. But if you want the kind of relationship that God intended for you to have, you have to have fellowship with him. You have to have fellowship with Jesus Christ. And in order to have fellowship, we all just agreed to that. In order to have fellowship, you actually have to spend time together. You have to talk, right? Well, the same is true for us. We have to spend time together. And, it's great and it's good to meet together in a fellowship setting like this. But let's go back to Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2, way down at the bottom. Verse 46. Every day they devoted themselves to meeting together in the temple complex and broke bread together from house to house. Right? So it's an everyday kind of thing. And in order to be in the kind of relationship that the Lord has called us to have, that marks us out in the culture to say, wow, those people really love each other, we have to have that kind of intimate fellowship that's just kind of a daily kind of thing. And so there's a key to that, which is that you have to do it on purpose, right? Now, some relationships are easy, right? If you've got a good friend that you get along with really, really well, and you like hanging out together, and you like talking to each other, those are easy relationships, right? You've got a grandchild that, you just adore, that, you move the moon for. Those are easy relationships, right? But for the most part, again, if we're going to have what Jesus talked about in terms of being marked out by the culture as loving one another to the extent that that's obvious to everybody, we have to have those kind of relationships with our brothers and sisters. And that takes some effort to do, especially in our culture. In more primitive cultures, like what Sarah likes to go and visit, they have less of a problem with this, right? Because they're all in one area together, typically for many, many years. And I remember watching a documentary with Lisa a few years ago about some people who came from Africa to the United States, and then they were here for a while and they just wanted to go home. They came from squalid conditions, what we would look at and say are terrible, terrible conditions, and to America, and they were living in houses and apartments and stuff like that and had good jobs, were going to college and all this kind of stuff. And all they wanted was to go back to what they had before.
Really?
Yeah. Because what they didn't have here was the closeness of the relationships, the fellowship that they had there. And I remember one woman talking about how lonely it was in America. And so this is, so we have this problem more so than Christians in other places, where we're so separated and isolated from each other because of the way we live as Americans, that we have to work hard at this, right? We have to be purposeful to fellowship with one another. And now we have a lot of great tools which we use, such as the Facebook Messenger stuff and things like that, and Zoom and the telephone and texting and all that kind of stuff. And it's good. It's great to get together as well, but obviously we have a little problem with that, in that we all live in other parts of the country. But so we need to use these technologies to stay in fellowship. But I want to give you some ideas tonight to start kind of thinking outside of the box a little bit about this stuff, beyond just simply posting on Facebook Messenger and stuff like that, and communicating that way, or getting on the phone with each other, all of which is good and absolutely should do. Let's go to Acts. Let's see, where is it? Yeah. Let's go to Acts chapter 4. And we'll just read this section here. Starting verse 32, sorry. Acts chapter 4, verse 32. Now the large group of those who believed were of one heart and mind, and no one said that any of his possessions was his own. That is amazing to me. But instead, they held everything in common. And the apostles were giving testimony with great power to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was on all of them. For there was not a needy person among them, because all those who owned lands or houses sold them, brought the proceeds of the things that were sold, and laid them at the apostles' feet. This was then distributed for each person's basic needs. Now think about that for just a minute in terms of what Jesus had said about his commandment to love one another, right? And how Christians would stand out in the culture, where the rest of the culture, you ask them, how do you know who a Christian is? And they would go, oh, well, those are the people that really love each other, And so this is the manifestation of that we as brothers and sisters, we make sure that each other, that we're taken care of. And we're willing to sacrifice our possessions in order to ensure that that happens. Now that'll make you stand out in the culture. Big time. So there's something to think about outside of the box, right? Well, how are you going to know what the needs are if you're not in close relationship with each other, right? If we're not intimately in communication and everybody knows, we have this thing, we in our culture where our business is our business. We're very private people, that kind of thing. We don't, especially in some cases, I might be a little embarrassed if I've got some problem or need or whatever, and it's my business and I'll handle it. We're very individualistic in our American culture, but we're not called to an American culture. We are called to a Christian culture. We are called to the Christ culture. And so we kind of get out of our way of doing things and thinking things because we're supposed to stand out from the culture. The culture is supposed to look at us and go, wow, those people are so different and they love each other so much. What is that all about? I want to know more about that. And so being in close with each other and knowing each other and knowing what's going on with each other and being a part of each other's lives allows us to have the knowledge to know when somebody needs something and needs some help with something. So there's something to kind of think out of the side of the box that we haven't really talked about before, I don't think. And, maybe we start having a conversation about that. Turn to Acts chapter 10. No, I'm sorry, 12. So Acts chapter 12, and where we see that James is killed, Peter is thrown in jail. They're going to execute Peter. In fact, when we pick up the story of Peter in verse 6, we see that on the night before Herod was to bring him out for execution. So when Peter gets rescued by the angel, the very next day, he's going to be executed. He's been in jail. Basically what was going on, the Passover feast was happening, and Herod didn't want to execute him during Passover. That would be bad. And so, Peter's being kept in prison. So we know the story here. The angel comes and rescues him. Verse 11, he's out. Then Peter came to himself and said, "Now I know for certain that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's grasp and from all that the Jewish people expected." When he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John Mark, where many had assembled and were praying. Right? So here's a situation. There's a great need. And so what the believers have done is they've gathered together to pray. Now this makes sense to us, right? We have a Facebook Messenger prayer group, and people post all the time on there, and people will respond with the little prayer hands thing, and indicating that they're praying for that, and that's awesome. But here's a little thing to think of outside of the box. What if at times when someone has a great need, say for instance, when Dean posted about Bruce earlier today, especially if someone has an urgent need, think about Peter, right? This wasn't just a great need. It was a great need, but it was also an urgent need. There would be a point at which prayer would no longer do anything because he would have been executed. You think about David with Bathsheba when he's slept with Bathsheba and gotten her pregnant. He ends up having Uriah killed, and then he's confronted by Nathan, and he repents, and Bathsheba has the baby, but the baby is dying, and so David begins to pray, right? And he fasts and he prays and he's on his face and he's just praying his heart out, and he's praying his heart out because the need is urgent. But that baby dies, and what does he do? He gets up, he washes, it's done, right? So when there's an urgent need, it's not like we can wait. I used to have this weird thing that I used to think that if, let's say, somebody asked me to pray for them at 3:00 in the afternoon because they were going to be going into surgery. And so then let's say I forgot at 3:00, and I didn't remember until 6:00 that I was supposed to pray for them in their surgery, right? So I had it in my head that it was okay because God would have seen me praying in the future. So I could pray at 6 o'clock and then it would retrofit, Now, I'm sorry. I don't believe that anymore. I think it was a dumb idea. Right? And I realized, especially as you see stuff all throughout Scripture in terms of the urgency of prayer, that no, that's not how it works. When a prayer need is urgent, we got to pray right now, right? So here's a out of the box kind of thing to think about. What if when something comes up that's an urgent prayer need, a number of people take a few minutes, hop on a Zoom together, and pray together for that thing? Just as if, with the people who came together in John Mark's mother's house and were praying fervently together for Peter, right? That's a little different. And, the power of multiple people praying together is forceful in the spiritual realm. The more people who are praying, the better. And there's something about praying together in unison, in unity, that multiplies that power. I don't understand how that works. I've never seen any place in the Scripture where it explains why that is, but I know it to be true. And so now let's go back to Acts chapter 2. Let's talk about one last thing here. I've talked about this one before, but I know we haven't done it very much. And I doubt others haven't done this very much, but I really think it's a good idea. And so this is another kind of out of the box sort of thing to think in terms of how we can be more in fellowship with each other on a daily basis. Let's go back to where'd it go? Verse 46. Yeah, that's his. I want outside. Acts chapter 2, verse 46. Every day they devoted themselves to meeting together in the temple complex and broke bread from house to house. They ate together every day. Now, personally, I like eating with other people. I think that's awesome. I wish I lived in a culture where every day I was able to just eat with, other people. I just think that's awesome. But okay, so one of the things, and some of you guys will remember, I've a few times in the past I've talked about this, about using Zoom to have a meal with the other people that we fellowship with in our Zoom fellowship, in our virtual fellowship. And here's how you do it, right? You sit on one side of your table and you put your laptop or your iPad or whatever and on the table facing you, and you've got your food in front of you, and then the other person on the other side is doing the exact same thing, or maybe 2 or 3 people are all doing the same thing, and you're going to have a meal together, right? And talk to each other. You probably don't want to do too many people doing this because of the way Zoom works. It's like a crowd of people, 10 people at a table. It generally, you're going to need to pare it down to the 2 or 3 people next to you and talk. The whole table can't talk to each other all at once, right? That doesn't really work in a when you're together in person. But so you have one or a few people together and you have a meal together. Or how about this? You go to a coffee shop and you put your iPad or your phone or your whatever, your laptop, tablet, whatever it is, and the other person is at another coffee shop doing the exact same thing, and you have coffee together. I mean, the sky's the limit in terms of these kinds of ideas, right? To have fellowship with each other. We are a family.
How Megan and Annalisa watch movies.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So my daughter Megan, her best friend is Annalisa Torrey, who lives in Kissimmee, Florida. And they don't live in the same state. They live a long way away from each other. They spend a lot of time together. And they do it in some of the ways that I just talked about, right? They actually watch movies together. They found a service where they can synchronize the movie that they're watching at each end. And they can actually talk to each other while the movie's going on.
Maybe see each other? I don't know.
And they can see each other if they want to do that as well. And so they watch movies together, right? Or they'll get on YouTube together and they'll watch YouTube videos together. They do that kind of stuff as well, right? They do all kinds of stuff together like that. And so even though they're very close friends, they're very far apart. They spend a lot of time together.
They also periodically goes down there and they go to Disney World.
Yeah, they do like to. Yeah, Annalisa's coming here in June, and Megan was there in December. So those are just some things to think about. I tell you what, I'm gonna open it up for your ideas and thoughts. Oh, I'm always pushing the wrong one. There we go.
If anybody else,
Donna's got her hand up.
John, this is so great. You're kind of coming right out with the prayer of my heart, and I have captured this kind of lifestyle in the past, and maybe became a little wayward. But when I was in a church, and it doesn't matter what church it was in, I had prayer partners. I assure you, we prayed more than 3 times a week, and we did things together. I saw with my own eyes. Not an exaggeration, not a name it and claim it, not off the wall. I saw power from on high be synchronized in a partnership relationship with people that I got to know pretty well. And we were committed. We didn't falter, well, I got to, and screw each other up. Very committed to that unification in prayer. I saw prayer answered, and I was very sold on having a prayer partner. I never will forget my friend Andrea and I sharing everything from, I always was the one with food. So, yeah, I would just, share the wealth that I had and make meals and stuff. And I worked and stuff. It's just a way of giving, and people show up at my house and vice versa. And we gave materially to one another. We became very close. And it was all this loving and giving. And those were the most cherished relationships. They were not forced. This section of the Bible that you're preaching is what we were living right from this section of the Bible. That's what we were doing in our activities and in our prayer, and the way that we held each other in high esteem and took care of each other, even at times, even if we were troubled with each other, and would overcome our idiosyncrasies because we were determined to be family oriented, even though we were not blood, but it was spiritual. This is the section of scripture that we made live, and I'll never forget it. It can be done.
Yep. Yeah. Who else? Lisa, you were about to say something a minute ago.
I was going to say, if anybody else has an iPhone, they can get Game Pigeon, and then I'll play the anagrams and word hunt.
I don't know if you guys could hear that. She said that she has this thing. We have this thing on our phones called Game Pigeon, and we text games to each other and play games together.
I said, if anybody else has iPhone, they can get Game Pigeon, and I'll play games.
And I'll tell you, if I'm having a particularly stressful day at work, and all of a sudden I get a game from Lisa, and they take, a minute, 2 minutes to play, that kind of thing. It's a nice kind of breather.
Stress
Yes, from the day.
I have a question.
Yes.
I know how Skype and FaceTime work, with people. But with Zoom, if you used Zoom, would you not have to have a host? One of those people would have to be a host, right?
Yeah, you have to have a code that you can use, and the codes for Wednesday and Sunday are always available, but only one will work at a time, right? And a lot of times I'm using them for work and stuff like that. But you can sign up for a Zoom account yourself for free, and you can have, for a free account, you can do a meeting up to 40 minutes. I think it's 40 minutes, maybe 45 minutes, but something like that, right? And you can always, if you're having a meeting with somebody and your 40 minutes runs out, you just start another one, and then you get another 40 minutes, right? And so it's not really a big deal. So you can do all of this for free.
So one person would have to set that up?
Yeah, one of the two of you would have to set that up.
Set that up.
Yeah.
And the other one would get the code and just hook on.
Yeah.
Do its okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who else? You guys are quiet tonight.
Well, I'll just say that at the nursing home, there's one guy. His name is Frank. He's a really nice guy, and he has such simple believing. He just really does. He amazes me. He always loves when I come. He always says, "Hey, Dean, I want you to come all the time," and I'm always blessed to have you around. And when I'll share something from God's Word. In fact, I read the 5 chapters from John on the Last Supper today because I wanted to cover that, because we had covered, John Schoenheit's teaching of it a couple of days last week, but I wanted to just read through that, and everybody else fell asleep, because it's right after lunch, right? And Frank is still wide awake. God bless his heart. And every time I get done with it, he'll always shake my hand, and he'll get up and he'll hold me, and he'll just say, "I love you, brother." And it's just so neat, because the guy's got such simple believing, and I really think he's a lot better than I am. I mean, you're not supposed to compare yourself with another person, but Frank has just got a beautiful heart, and he's just a wonderful guy. And so there's a guy that just is so simple in his heart. And he was telling me, I was sharing what prayer is, and simply asking God. And, where Jesus Christ said, just keep asking, part of his prayer in his, when he's teaching his disciples, keep asking, just ask once. And he was saying that, sometime back he had this big pain in his stomach, and he said to Jesus, "Could you just put in a good word for me to God?" And when he said that, the pain went completely away, just like that. I mean, that's a simple believing that this man has. And so Frank is just an adorable man. He's just a wonderful man. I just love being around him. And so just a great guy. So anyway, that's a little bit of fellowship that I can really have with him. The other people are great people too, but Frank is he's just so simple, and just a big blessing.
Yeah. I mean, that's all, it's not like this is complex. It's just, being a part of each other's lives. John's got his hand up.
Yeah, this is certainly not new or innovative. Maybe it's just lacking on my part, but I just think one-on-one talking with somebody on the phone. Maybe I just don't do that enough. I don't call. Somebody will come to mind. You know, Truett may come to mind, but it's 10:30 in the morning. He's at work. I'm not going to call him. You know, but then I actually think about it. It's like if somebody calls me and I'm busy, I just don't answer the phone, and I'll get back to you or whatever. It sounds strange, but a lot of times that comes to somebody will come to mind, and if you think about a fellowship, but when you get together with people like at a national conference, or you just have a fellowship of 20 people, and afterwards, what happens? Well, there's coffee, usually something to drink, some snacks maybe, and you'll see 2 people over there talking, 3 people over here talking. It's I think in my mind that's what I'm going to try and do more. Just reach out and talk to people for 2 or 3 minutes, if that's all it is. Now I do have a question, and it kind of relates to this, but not really. At the end of Acts chapter 4, it says basically that Barnabas sold a field he owned and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. I was just reading this today, and I also did Acts chapter 5. I read that today. And it occurred to me, when he sold the field that he owned, now, did he get that field back at the Jubilee year? According to Leviticus 25, I think it is. Just a curiosity question. I don't know. But
I don't know. It's hard to say, where the field was, for instance, because he was from Cyprus. It may be that it was
ancestral land.
Yeah, it might have been in Cyprus, in which case it wouldn't have been part of the. First of all, the Levites, they didn't have land. So they didn't have ancestral land. So whatever it was that he owned wasn't part of that. Not only that, but by this time the Romans controlled everything. So it wasn't like that stuff applied anymore. They could do whatever they wanted to. And that had been the case for a long time. When the Babylonians came in, they took over, got rid of that whole system. And so, it doesn't mean that the Jews didn't try and kind of put things back in order, but by the time the Romans are there, it's, it doesn't really work that way anymore. But just the fact that he was a Levite would mean, from the standpoint of how the inheritance worked for the 12 tribes, really it was 13, but that the Levites didn't have they did not have that inheritance. Their inheritance was God.
Well, yeah, but in Leviticus 25:33, it just says, whatever property one of the Levites can redeem, a household in the city they possess must be released at the Jubilee.
Yeah.
Because the houses in the Levitical cities are their possession among the Israelites. Anyway, it was just a thought that occurred to me as I read it. I don't want to railroad this conversation in the topic.
No, it's an interesting question, but I don't know, but certainly, he sold the field, whether he leased it or he actually sold it. It's interesting that he took that money and he gave it to the apostles to distribute to, whoever had need.
Yeah, well, the very, very next chapter is Ananias and Sapphira, and I spent a lot more time studying that this morning than I did the other.
Yeah. Yeah, that's this is one of those terrible chapter breaks between chapter 4 and chapter 5, because chapter 5 at the beginning is actually part of this here. If you were going to break something, you'd break it in front of verse 36,
something like that. I wound up spending a lot of time reading Lenski, trying to get a better feel for chapter 5. But anyway, that's another.
So who else? I'd like to hear ideas like that, ideas about, John's idea was just phone calls. Oh, and by the way, John, the way I work is if you call me and I'm busy, I don't answer the phone. But I will see that you've called, assuming that I have your number programmed in my phone, and then leave a message or text me, and I will call you back. and I usually have time
I
today.
see Bruce there. How's Bruce doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
He just got done scarfing down dinner from just coming home.
Yeah, it was a late one today. I heard eating together, breaking bread, having a dinner. I like that idea, John. I think we'd probably all have to cook the same thing, so it would seem more real.
What?
Well, you think about if you go to a restaurant together,
You ordered it.
you're probably not going to eat the same thing.
Well, no, but it'd be like we all went to someone's house and they cooked the meal and we all ate from it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now, I actually think that's a cool idea. I've thought about this before. How cool it would be, you have like spaghetti night or something.
Oh,
There you
yeah,
go.
there you go.
And you get together with a few people and everybody has made spaghetti. and we're all going to eat.
That's
So
funny. Well, to add to that, Bruce had dinner with you all tonight.
I ate enough for everyone, so
Yeah,
we
you
all
did.
broke bread
You
together.
did.
We just didn't know it.
We had a ton of.
Oh, we had dinner with Greg and Julie before fellowship. So,
Yeah, that was very nice. Pam, are you trying to unmute yourself?
Molly.
No.
She was just on chat. She just
She's
said
chatting.
she told her dog that Uncle Greg was at the door, and he went to the door, started barking.
Hey, Molly.
That's me.
Hey, Jeremiah is my dog, and he has always responded to Greg when we say, Greg's coming, he starts to bark. It was just funny. But I'll share a minute about fellowship. Can you hear me? Am I still on?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Julie and Greg and my husband and myself and my daughter and my son, we have all pretty much been around each other for many years, and they're such a great example to me. And I'm gonna cry because I miss them. But anyway, we used to break bread together. We'd watch movies together. We'd hold fellowships in our living room together, listen to the word together. And they're just a huge impact in our lives. We're thankful to have them. And anyway, that's it. Before I cry.
That's cool. Well, I tell you, we've been super blessed to have these guys around.
Yep.
A couple of weeks. We're looking forward to good times together. But you actually made me think about something. Here's another out of the box thing, that when we know someone in the fellowship is struggling, to make an effort to reach out to that person. It's when you have a friend that maybe is sick, like seriously sick, that kind of thing, or dealing with a divorce or the loss of a loved one, or they're out of work and they're struggling to find a job, and maybe things have kind of gotten bad, and how much, if you've been in those kind of situations and a friend reached out, not once, but like every day, was calling you every day. How are you doing? How's it going? Tell me what's going on with you today. And let me pray for you today. And just does that every day, until things are better. That's huge. That is really huge. That is a big, big deal. And so that's another thing, is that, if you know somebody in the fellowship that's struggling with something, reach out to them frequently.
I have a bunch of, different examples that come through my mind, things that I just do, but I don't even think about them so much. Donna lives just a half an hour from me, and we've been, hanging out off and on, and that's really fun. And then when Sarah had her layover on the plane, the three of us got together. That was the gas. And today, a friend of mine from Indiana that's a believer had called me on the phone. She was just going for a walk, and she's like, I thought I'd give you a call. And I'm like, well, I'm gardening. Let me put on a headset, And so, I was working on my trees, and she was taking her walk, and we're having this conversation while we're both, doing stuff. And that's, with me, I'm almost always doing something. So the headset is crucial.
That's that's a great example, Michelle. If you're in the middle of doing something, call up somebody and just talk to them while you're doing it. Years ago, I read a book about how to train a hunting dog, and one of the interesting things that it said was when the first stage of the training, when you get the dog as a puppy, is you take the dog wherever you go. You want the dog to be with you all the time. So when you're just going to go run to the store real quick, you take the dog with you. You got to run those few errands, you take the dog with you. You need to go see a friend, you take the dog with you. You need to go mail a letter, you take the dog with you. And what happens is that dog becomes completely tied to you, so that when you begin the training, that this dog is glued to you. And I remember after I read it, the kids were much younger when they read it, and I thought, I need to do that with my kids. And I do. I try. I try. And if I'm gonna, I think it went a long way. Yes.
It worked too good.
Get away from me. Well. Yeah. The training is not perfect, but no. Of course, I did eventually get a hunting dog, and discovered that I really did not want to train a hunting dog, and that didn't last very long.
Can't give it back. Couldn't do that.
I decided, I had better things to do with my time. Did you have another example, Michelle?
I don't know. There's lots of people I talk to, on the phone like that. And pretty much whenever I hear from somebody, that's my thing, is the headset. That whatever I'm doing, I'll say to them, I'm like, oh, want to go do this with me? Do you want to, I'm going to go grocery shopping. You want to come along? But they'll just be on the phone on the headset. They're like, yeah, sure, why not? And so we'll do all kinds of things like that.
Yeah, I do the exact same thing, Michelle. I'll head out to the grocery store and I'll call somebody to, and they come grocery shopping with me.
What did Dean say
if he ever gets married? Should he take his wife with him everywhere so they can bond? Yes, so that later on she'll do what you say.
It works the other way too.
No, that's the whole idea. See, that's the whole idea, is what he just said. No, I don't think it would work too well.
Well, I tell you what, does anybody else have any ideas or anything they want to share?
I know the old-fashioned way doesn't work for everybody, but I was raised in a culture where, the Hallmark cards, and I still do that to a lot of people. I know I received cards from Dean. I was very, very blessed. And I remember one time Janet Speaks sent me a card out of the blue, and I was I was bedridden. I was so ill. And, I mean, she didn't have to. It's not like I was knee deep in relationship with Janet. She just felt very inspired, and her card kind of ministered to me because it was about, it spoke to the issue. And that was just, very mindful of her. It was like Jesus inspired her. It's about communicating, and by any means whatsoever, to communicate to that person's heart that you care about them. And love is a deed. It's not just a bunch of words. There's a lot of action to the word love. And, God bless you, Michelle. And so it hasn't, you have to act. Love is just not your words. You have to show that, you care for someone, and send that message, and to be able to bond. And bear fruit. I mean, love is a fruit. It's a manifestation of you living out your Christian commitment and love for others. You have to show it. So I still send cards, and I know Dean has sent me some cards, very loving, and Dean spends a lot of time on those cards. I mean, effort, calligraphy. He really uses his artistic ability to, send godly messages to. I just love that. And to me, it's not old school. For goodness sakes, we can't be all that lazy. There's still a mailbox, and there's still stamps. They're still selling them. Not everything's going to be Amazon, Oh, they probably got that going on too. Some kind of Amazon thing that you can send out and appear to somebody's door and sing Merry Christmas or something to them. Who knows? But it's the thought behind that.
Yeah. Yes, Donna, they do have that. Yeah. Yeah, Donna Weedman.
Yes.
How about you?
Oh,
What say
well,
you?
I'd like to share one thing with you. Is the DeMars and the Weedmans lived together for a couple years, and between us, we had 9 people in our family. And we had fellowships in our home, and we witnessed anything that moved in our neighborhood, which happened to be a Mormon neighborhood, which was great. But what we used to do as a family is that we played volleyball at the high school every Friday night, and because we had a full team with all of us. There was four adults and 5 children, and we would go and play volleyball, and our kids witnessed to the kids that we played with. And do you know, after a couple months of doing that, everybody wanted to play our team because we were unique. I mean, how many families live together and love each other and get along? So in that Mormon neighborhood, we were the unique people in that neighborhood. And we would sit out we had a big front porch, and would sit out there at night and talk to the people in the neighborhood and talk to them about what we believed. And it was great. I mean, we had a whole team, and it was wonderful. It really was. It was a great thing. And then those darn DeMars went to headquarters. Yeah, but it was wonderful. It was a unique time that we could get together and manifest God's love to these people, and they loved us because of it, and there was a lot of them that were not believers, but it was wonderful. And so they got to see God work.
That's really cool.
It is.
Very, very cool, Donna. Well, how about we pray? Let's do some praying. Who wants to start? Donna Weedman, you want to start us off?
Sure. Father, I thank you for this time that we can get together and share your word and your